So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So we have Jennifer Lehman, CEO of Mission Advancement. Jennifer has been a fundraising consultant since 1997, and she loves building relationships with nonprofit organizations and helping them realize their greater vision. And she is joined today by Rick Crocker, CEO of Samaritan Inn in McKinney, Texas, and Tracy Ferguson, the Chief Development Officer of the Samaritan Inn in McKinney, Texas. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be back. I've been on hiatus from webinars for a couple months. And today's conversation is hopefully going to be enlightening and maybe a little entertaining. And hopefully it's going to be helpful to those of you who might be in the hiring process. This is something we teach a lot, but I thought it was very timely given this great resignation that seems to be happening around the country, and knowing how many organizations are looking for folks right now in the development space. So I'm going to give you a little bit about who we are. Shannon's already introduced us all, so you'll get to know Rick and Tracy a little bit better in the next few minutes. But the outline for the discussion today is the first two bullets. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview on our observations on why development directors come and go from organizations and what we believe are sort of those non-negotiable qualities that you're looking for. So I'll just take a few minutes on that, and then we're going to dive right into the conversation with Rick and Tracy, and then leave a few minutes at the end for hopefully a couple of questions. So before I start, it's kind of interesting that we teach on this, because I just want to be clear that we are not an executive search firm. This is not a service that we provide. So the reason we teach on it is because it is such a common challenge that we see in a fundraising operation. And one of the biggest challenges that we see organizational leaders and boards struggle to resolve. So if we can help speak into how to solve that problem, then it just really helps the whole fundraising team and plan to be better executed. So this revolving door of development, it's an unfortunate part of our industry, but statistics say that the average tenure of a development director is about 18 months. And as most of us know, it takes about a year to get really comfortable in a job and to be productive. So that clearly is not beneficial for the organization or for the individual. So why do we see development directors leave? In very just quick thoughts on this, number one is just inadequate passion for the mission. And you're going to hear more about this in the conversation today. It's not that they don't align with your mission, believe in your mission, or have, some passion, but there's an inadequate sort of commitment, I think, to the mission that often makes people drift into other jobs. The second is unrealistic or non-existent expectations. In other words, expectations just aren't clear, or they're so pie in the sky unrealistic that nobody feels like they can be successful. So setting realistic expectations is a key factor. The third is lack of engagement from organizational leaders. And specifically here, I've called out the CEO and the board. Too many times I see development people hired and they're told, go do what you do and figure it out. And the CEO and the board sort of wipe their hands from it. And the development team gets very frustrated in that environment, and often you see turnover. And then kind of along with that is a lack of clear strategy or plan. So again, sometimes they'll hire a development person and say, whatever you did at March of Dimes, do that here. And there's really not an organizational commitment to what a fundraising strategy is for the long term. So those are some of the things that we see all the time with organizations that have a hard time retaining people. The non-negotiables then, which kind of play into those issues, number one is going to be mission connection and passion. Second is going to be someone who's people focused. And we are, just to be clear, talking about your chief development officer, development director, those who are the more external facing development team members. You may have development admins and database and grant writers, and that's fantastic. But we're really talking about those who are more external. So that people focused quality is something that is key. The soft skills or emotional intelligence that is really needed to be successful in this work, and somebody who's a team player, meaning they work with other parts of the organization, their program staff, leadership, board. They understand the value of working across the organization for the better of development. So these are the 4 non-negotiables. And the thing I want to hone in on here is the fact that these are things that are very difficult, if not impossible, to teach. So that's what I want to, share with you today as one of the primary messages, is looking for these skills is more important than some of the things that are more teachable. So other great qualities then that can be very helpful in this role: somebody who is strategic in their thinking and looking at big picture where you're going with a fundraising operation. Somebody who's competitive. I mean, I love people that have background in sports or other activities where they've been driven to win, because there is an element of that in fundraising, that you're trying to hit targets and get a yes and get that win in the organization. So that's helpful. And then nonprofit and fundraising experience. Of course, it's helpful. Of course, we love people that have sat in that chair before and walked that path. But our opinion at Mission Advancement is that is secondary to those first 4 bullets and those other kind of non-teachable qualities that we look for. Okay, so that's setting the stage. I'm going to dive in with Rick and Tracy and tell you a little bit about who they are and why we know them. And then we're going to begin some questions. So we met the Samaritan Inn a little over 2 years ago, and we're fortunate to be in an engagement with them to really help with annual fundraising. We were not there to help them hire. We were there to help them grow their operational funding model and come out of what they had been looking at as a deficit budget. So while we were in an engagement, they happened to have an empty Chief Development Officer seat, and Rick was leading that process. So we were just able to sort of speak into the process, give a little bit of advice along the way, and more than anything, just kind of walk the journey with them. And from that search came the hiring of Tracy Ferguson. So this is now 2 years later. Tracy's been in this role since October of 2019. And we also were engaged while she was transitioning into the role and beginning her work, and had got the chance to help kind of craft some of her strategy and plan alongside her. So that's how we know Rick and Tracy. And they have such a great story, and they're such a good example of this hiring process and some of the work they've done since, that I just want them to be able to share from their point of view. So I'm going to start with the hiring process, and I'm going to ask Rick to go first and talk a little bit about the process that you utilized for hiring and the kind of candidates that you ultimately interviewed once you got down to a small group.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I'm kind of a traditionalist and button-down guy. And so my normal reflex of action is to do a traditional route, which I did when our CDO seat became empty. And, went through the process of advertising the opening of the position on AFP and our local Center for Nonprofit Management. I did a lot of networking with other CEOs, talked to a few CDOs, few people that I knew, and even was willing to do some sheep stealing if necessary. And so began to receive resumes as a result of advertising that opening. And if you've been through that before, you know that you can be inundated with hundreds of resumes. We didn't get hundreds, but we got many resumes that we needed to sift through. And so that process went on, and we began to prioritize those potential candidates on our search team, looking at their experience, their background, doing some checking and things like that, and began to set up interviews with those individuals. And we started the process of interviewing those individuals, and they all left us feeling kind of cold in the process. And it just wasn't producing the kind of results that we were looking for.
Yeah. So then, did you advertise the position internally? What was that process like or not?
I didn't really advertise it internally. Obviously, I had informed our entire employee team that our CDO was leaving. We had a typical farewell and all of that, and that we would be in the process of searching for a new CDO and the responsibilities of what that position was about.
Okay. So then you got a phone call one day, if memory serves, from Tracy Ferguson. And what was that conversation like, and who was Tracy in the organization?
Yeah, so Tracy had been with our team at that point for about 3 years, I believe. She was working in a part-time position as donations manager. She was handling all of our in-kind donations and third-party drives and things when we needed, food or non-food drives for our program. And she was doing a bang-up job. I mean, she was an innovator. In fact, I think in her second year, she was named the Innovator of the Year in our organization, got an award. She still has the award in her office. And it really, that award spoke so highly of the work that she was doing. She digitized all of our in-kind process, really took it to new levels that we had never seen before. But it was only a part-time position and doing a great job. And she called me one day and said, "Hey, I think I'd like to throw my hat in the ring." And I wish I had had a mirror that day to be able to look at my face when she called me on the phone. And I said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, sure." And, I was trying to be polite, but I knew that she didn't really have that classical background that I was looking for in a new CDO. And so on my one shoulder, I was saying, "There's no way." On the other shoulder, I was saying, "But I got to give her a chance. I mean, she's a loyal member of our team. She's done such a great job. I need to give her an opportunity."
Right. And we should have set up a little bit more about the mission of Samaritan Inn. But Samaritan Inn is an organization that helps people get back on their feet. They do have a shelter that houses families, individuals, but it's a temporary program that helps people get employment and kind of get back into a stable situation. But there is a physical building that houses full range of services, and Tracy's role, while it sounds like it was sort of development, it actually was not. The in-kind, they get quite a bit of in-kind goods donated to the Samaritan Inn, and Tracy was a part of the program team, the way that it was structured back at that time. So Tracy was not a part of the development administrative side of the organization. She was very much in the program side. So that's the way it was played out there. Okay, so Tracy, talk a little bit about making that phone call to Rick. What motivated you to do that, and what interested you in even believing that you were a fit for this role?
So I think it started kind of as an offhanded joke in the office, truthfully. Some of my coworkers were reading the job descriptions, and Rick and really all of them had only seen me in this very physical role, jeans just thrown over my shoulder, ponytail, lugging items all day, every time I was there. And so they were reading the job description one day, and I had passed through and I said, "I could so do that job." And they kind of did the same initial reaction, I think, of Rick, like, "Wait a minute, you can do this job." And then I had the pressure of, coworkers, and went home with my spouse, and that pressure of, "Listen, you could so do this." Like, my kids were, timing was right. They were, much more independent. And I thought, I can do this. And I think it finally came down to, what do I have to lose? I love the mission. I love what we do. I have nothing to lose by putting my, hat in the ring, as Rick says. So I made that phone call, and yeah, his voice was an exact depiction of what I could imagine his face at the time when I called him. So yeah, it was a huge, stepping out for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so you put Tracy's name in, and you guys began kind of mulling over candidates and narrowing it down. You did have a committee, as I recall, a board committee that was working with you. So I'm going to take a step here, just kind of wrap the hiring process as you think about other organizations that might be hiring. What are we looking for? Many times we're looking for the wrong kind of people. That's one of the common mistakes. There is this overemphasis on education experience and resumes that sort of have a proven track record of fundraising, sometimes certifications or money raised other places. Sometimes a personal network is the direction an organization wants to go with a development team member. So as you guys worked through, you had the classical process, as you discussed, Rick, and I know you had resumes that fit a lot of that description. And then you had Tracy in the mix. So talk to us then about how you guys worked through the decision-making process and ultimately move forward.
So we did all of those missteps that you just put on that slide. We were looking for the classical experience, training, background, all of that. Not so much bringing their network, but all of those things that you typically would look for in bringing a star onto your team. But as we interviewed the few that became the top candidates, when the individual left the room, the search team just kind of looked at each other and we rolled our eyes and thought, oh my gosh, what have we gotten into here? This is not working. And so I remember we had interviewed one individual, and that was our reaction when that was done. And then Tracy was scheduled next to meet with the search team. And none of them had known Tracy because she played this role over in programs. So these board members had no idea who Tracy was. And I remember opening the door and inviting Tracy into the room, and she just kind of, proud as a peacock, just strutted into the room and acted like she owned the place, and went and introduced herself to each one and sat down. The interview began. And again, I wish I'd had a mirror, because I think that there had to be a stunned look on my face, like, she just is knocking this out of the park. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and seeing. And I saw all of the members of the search team kind of lean forward and they were asking questions, and each question, Tracy was just nailing those answers, each one. She was demonstrating passion for our organization and our mission and hitting it on all 8 cylinders, just fantastic. And it was just amazing. So when she left the room, we were all kind of stunned. And then we started to say, I think we need to take a serious look at Tracy. Mm-hmm. And then I remember consulting with MAP about this and saying, boy, this would be a gamble for us. She doesn't have any of the classical training or experience, and asked for MAP's advice and counsel. And I remember, Jennifer, I think you were with us in the board meeting when we discussed this in the board. And in the moment, after a lot of discussion and debate by members of the board, the chairman of the board looked at me and said, well, Rick, it's your decision. What do you want to do?
Yes. And
I kind of gulped. And I said, I think we need to hire Tracy. Yep. And everybody around the table, there was a general consensus, and everybody said, yep, we think that's the right thing to do. And that's what we did. And she began in October of 2019. Yep.
So Tracy, what's your kind of recollection of the interview process, and why do you think you didn't meet the other candidates necessarily, but why do you think you stood out and made the impression you did?
So I think it really goes back, Jennifer, to what you said about a passion for the mission. I had been here. I knew what we did. I believed in what we did. As a team, I very much functioned in that we were, nobody really was here for a paycheck. We were here because we knew we were changing lives. And so for me, knowing and believing in the mission of the inn and, being able to just stand up and talk to that was very natural and very easy for me. At one point, one of the board members had said, how comfortable are you with asking for money? Like, you have to make the ask, right? And I sat there for a minute and I looked at him and I said, I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for people to change lives. That is completely different. And I don't have a problem at all asking and giving people the opportunity to have an impact on people's lives. And so I think absolutely having a connection with that mission that's so deep, it was just very natural. And as I said, I mean, I didn't really have anything to lose. So I was fully, on board with it at that point.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, I love that nobody scripted you with that. I know that we weren't working with you at that time, Tracy. We didn't know you in this context. And that's an answer I might have given somebody that was in an interview process.
Yay.
But the fact that just came straight from your heart and just your feeling about the organization is a great sign that that's how you viewed the role. So thinking about the decision process then, first of all, have a process. Sometimes this is a little bit too organic or one person's job, but involve other leaders on the staff or board, especially if this is a senior team role and you've got a senior team that works closely together. I would want my senior team to have some exposure to this person before bringing them in at that level. Explore passion. I recommend all the time to CEOs or others that are interviewing, this should be the biggest part of your interview. What do they know about your organization? Why does this cause matter to them? What are those things? And it needs to be stuff that didn't just come from your website. So first of all, do they know you? Have they done homework? Is there really a connection that's much deeper than just something they could read? How do they interact with other groups? Back to those people skills that I mentioned in the beginning. Development people have to be able to interact with a variety of leaders, of gatekeepers, everybody from the admin staff to CEOs who are making big decisions. So how do they interact in a variety of settings with lots of different types of people? Don't hire a warm body too quickly. This is another mistake in the decision process, I think, where you kind of get to a group and you're not really excited the way Rick kind of described. You kind of, okay, but you feel like you have to move forward. And if it's not a really exciting yes, then maybe there should be a pause and rethinking. And then last, make sure that direct manager has the ultimate decision. Obviously, Rick had that power here as the CEO. Regardless of what level you may be hiring, ultimately, the person who's going to own that function and those results is the person you want to be ultimately making that call. So there's a few things, again, that we've seen that we recommend. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the transition. So the decision was made. Tracy was hired. I was in that board meeting, and I do remember kind of the discussion about the risks, as they, I believe, coined it, that they were taking on Tracy, especially knowing that the organization at that time was moving into a large operational budget and needed to grow its revenue, and there were some big challenges ahead. So Rick, talk a little bit about the strengths and challenges that were related to her transition from another department in the organization and as a leader over on the development team.
Yeah, so as Jennifer mentioned, we were kind of in the middle of a process of pivoting philosophically and structurally our whole development and fundraising process as a result of the diagnostic that MAP had done for us. We had contracted with them to do this for us. And a lot of recommendations came out of that full diagnostic that they performed for us, and realized that we had to move from a transactional to a more relational type fundraising operation. So we're in the midst of that while also filling the CDO seat. So obviously we needed to school Tracy. Once a decision was made, we needed to school her into what does a relational fundraising operation look like. And so at that point, again, And the only way that I was willing to consider bringing Tracy on is if we had somebody along with me to help her in that whole process and making it a success. And this is where MAP really helped us again in coming alongside Tracy, giving her the fundamentals and the tools for her toolbox to be able to accomplish this big structural and philosophical change. And there was accountability in that whole structure. There was coaching, there was encouragement, weekly meetings between Tracy and me, between MAP and the three of us were together. So it was a real process. And I think we paid our dues in that process, and we'll talk about this in a little while, but we saw the results as a result of paying our dues and very carefully working through that process. I think the change for Tracy coming from programs to development was, it was a big leap. And obviously a lot of the, she went from part-time to full-time, so there were adjustments for her. There were adjustments in relationships because she was very tied into relationships in our program staff. And now she was coming to our administrative building and working and building relationships there. And so there was a lot going on relationally and structurally and organizationally within that whole time period.
Yeah. And Tracy, you lived this, and, at the Samaritan Inn, those of us who know you, there's literally two buildings, literally across the street from each other. And so not just figuratively, but literally, you were crossing the street and going from the program side of the organization to the administrative building and where development sort of lives and offices. So from your perspective, what helped you transition from that, being in that role, and what were the challenges of making that shift?
There were a lot of challenges. The pros, and what really helped me, I think, was the champion of staff that I had within programs that were eager for, really a collaborative between, there were just a lot of silos. There was we say it's across the street, but it was really a gulf between us. And so, coming over, it was a very different culture in admission at the time. I was coming into a situation where the staff given were very transactional, weren't really keen on change. We hadn't been relational. It had been that we were offering things or, advertisement or whatever it is to build partnerships instead of really connecting our donors to our mission. And so it was hard. We didn't cultivate. I was really asking them to change the culture. And then I also stepped in where my associate development director had apparently a role and didn't get it, which made it a little bit more sticky to walk through. So I had walked into a lot of challenges, definitely the imposter syndrome. What have I done? but having, thankfully, the partnership we had with MAP that helped with the fundamentals, having, Rick, once he committed to the idea of hiring me, was amazing. He was my champion. He stood by me, and just really, despite having those moments that I'm sure both MAP and Rick had by my naivety on a lot of things, probably thinking, oh God, what have we done? but again, I think really quickly in implementing the relational, we had, shifting of staff. I promoted several staff members from within, really focused on some of our outreach and social media platforms and updating our website, and really kind of digging into the areas that we felt were key, not only to acquisition, but to really building development and deepening that cultivation and segmenting donors. And I think that, with that team mentality and that healthy conflict within our team of, we're gonna have some challenges, but we can get through this. I just think that that's really what launched us to what really is a success at this point.
Yeah.
And I would add too, Jennifer, that the board really supported the investment in development. They recognized that we needed to do this. at this particular point in our organizational history. And so, they got behind a financial investment in investing in additional staff and upping the count in development, headcount in development, to really stand behind Tracy and her initiative to bring us into a new day in development and fundraising.
Yeah, that's great. And Tracy, every organization has some kind of tension between development and programs. Like, that is a natural tension that I've seen in virtually every nonprofit that I've worked with. And coming from program, I know that you were able to bridge some gaps there. And while you had a lot of challenges making that shift, there were also some real strengths to the relationships that you had within the organization, and maybe being able to bridge some of that gap. So talk a little bit about how you were able to leverage some of your relationships with programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was really a key. I mean, we talked about this coming in. We talked about it in the interview process. It was very critical that, we were on the same mission and that these worlds had to come together. I can't sell the program if programs isn't running the program, so we were absolutely like this, and we had just been functioning as separate silos. And so, we talked about getting resident stories, and well, you come get them yourself. Well, the relationships. And so there was just this controversy. And so just really engaging with caseworkers and, the programs director and, even the career development and our financial literacy, and saying, hey, let's talk about what you need and how I can get the things you need. Let's talk about, what success stories you see coming down the pipeline. And can you engage me with your residents so that I can do the interviews? So I go over and get the interviews once they make that connection. And so we've really been able to, present success stories to donors, which is really what it's all about. I mean, I can produce numbers all day long, but if I can't show results and be able to give testimonials and really see the people and the hearts that they're changing, that's really the impact. And so I absolutely think that ship and that sort of marrying between the two worlds has been critical to our success. And it's as simple as being over on a tour and being so comfortable with staff, introduce somebody and say, hey, this is our lead counselor. Let me meet them and ask any questions you have. And so because they know me and we have that open relationship, it's never a problem. It's never an inconvenience. It's always us working together as a team. And that's ultimately what causes success, for sure.
Yeah. That's one of the real strengths, I think, of hiring in a situation like you guys had. And not everybody's going to have that scenario, but when Shannon was introducing some of the attendees this morning, I noticed we had a few schools, and there's a lot of schools that struggle with finding good people. And I always say, do you have any teachers? Do you have any former teachers? What about parent volunteers, or others who, again, are really entrenched in the program and they love it. They've lived it in some way, because the strength of what they bring over from a relationship perspective and understanding is just something that's really hard to teach to somebody. So I witnessed it watching you guys walk this journey, and how much better the relationship between program and development became over time. And I think a lot of that was the relational capital that Tracy had built in her other role. So to kind of wrap up this little piece of the conversation, anytime we bring somebody in to get a successful transition, back to those clear, reasonable expectations. In Tracy's case, the in was already in a process of developing this. So that was something that was, had been, a course had already been set, but making sure that that's clear. Really identifying what they need to be successful. And, Rick is kind to talk about the role that we played, but even if counsel is not in your budget, or it's not an option for you, there's other resources out there that can help somebody with some of the best practices. There's lots of free trainings and online things that at least can give somebody some fundamentals. But of course, bringing in outside support is also another great way to do that. And then make sure you conduct regular check-ins, because what they need in month 1 looks very different than what they're going to need month 6 or month 12. So making sure that as that person progresses in their role, just having very intentional kind of sit downs and check-ins on how they're doing, what they need, what other resources might be available to them to get them comfortable. Okay, so now we're 2 years later. I can't believe it's been 2 years. I know you can't either, because we had this little pandemic happen a few months after Tracy took her role. So not only did she step into an area that she'd never worked in professionally before, but then she had to do it in unprecedented conditions. So I know, I know all the great stories about you guys, but I really want to hear your perspective on the reasons that you guys have experienced some success, and even an anecdote or a story that you might want to share about how the last 2 years have played out with Tracy in this role. So Rick, why don't you start?
Well, I really want to make sure that those who are participating today understand the importance of this individual's passion. And I think that if there's any ingredient that has contributed to Tracy's success in this role, it's been her passion for our mission and our organization and the residents that we serve. And as you said earlier on, that's not something you can teach. It's either inherent or it's not. Tracy has a high EQ. She's great emotional intelligence. She's intuitive. She's great with people. She puts people at ease quickly. So all of those God-given gifts that she has really have been put to great use over the last 2 years, and really helped us. I mean, at that time, October 2019, we were clueless about a pandemic. We didn't know what COVID-19 was. But because we were pivoting philosophically and structurally, we had new energy and a new CDO in place. We were taking all the preparatory steps to be ready for the pandemic, which was a real gut buster for most nonprofits. But looking back now, sort of post-pandemic, we really sailed through. I don't mean to brag, but we really sailed through that whole period. And because of the relationships that were being built with donors and new donors coming on board, we had one anecdote. We had one anonymous donor that came forward and made a huge one-time gift. We were amazed at it. It was just kind of a blessing from above that came to us. And so I was so proud of Tracy and her cultivation of that, even though to this day, the donor is still anonymous to us. But as a result of the way she followed up with that individual through a foundation, still anonymous, that donor has given Tracy 4 or 5 different times now sizable gifts, and has become a major donor and supporter of our work. We still don't know who that individual is, but I attribute the success of that in particular to Tracy's efforts and who she is as our Chief Development Officer.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things I know about Tracy is that Tracy will talk to anybody. And that was one of the first indications that she could do really well at this job. Is she wasn't afraid to talk to anybody. She wasn't afraid to pick up the phone. And like Rick said, she does kind of have that God-given gift of just setting people at ease. And actually, just recently, Tracy, you said something to me about if I have a conversation with somebody and I don't know enough about them at the end to be able to ask them questions next time about more kind of personal things in their lives, then I haven't done my job. And I think, that's innate for you. I don't think that's something that you were taught necessarily, but that's how you view the relationship building process. So Tracy, from your perspective, as you think about the last 24 months, what do you think has contributed to your success? And I do want you guys to talk a little bit about the success that you've seen and just percentage wise, how you've been able to sort of exceed budget and expectations. So Tracy, go ahead.
So, I think for me, it's really been leaning into instruction. I mean, I didn't come into this role saying, I know what I'm doing, no big deal. I came into this role saying, I have the passion and I know as a team, we can have impact and we can change things. And so I think that's critical too. I think that having mission advancement help with the fundamental tools and encouragement I needed, because encouragement was a lot of it. Having Rick's support through it and his partnership of we got this, and really just transitioning to that personal engagement. I mean, absolutely never leave a conversation without having something to go back and ask about. I have donors that I call and ask how dog's doing, because I know that their dog is their baby and I know the dog's name and I know how long they've had them. And, when they're talking, just stop talking, just listen. They will do their whole life story if you will give time. And that's really hard in the development role, because you always feel like you got to get to the next money. You got to get to the next money. And it has to stop being about money. It has to start being about the relationships that you cultivate, because eventually it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off in people living and buying into your mission for a lifetime. And so, I think that's really it. I mean, there's, I hired a Rockstar team. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've done that I think contribute, holistically to the whole thing. But I think ultimately that relationships are change, making sure your team has it, and not doing it alone is probably the biggest impacts that have really changed the bottom line. And I know we didn't say this at the beginning, but when Rick brought me in at the beginning, it was quite grim. I mean, it was like, not only are we taking a chance on you, but I don't know if the best can get us out of this situation. So Rick, I'll let you elaborate on that.
Yeah, at that point, we were looking at about $1 million of deficit in that year based on our budget projections. So it was a very serious point in our history, and a real challenge for our whole team to say, we've got to turn this thing around. We've got to raise more money. And 2 years later, we finish our fiscal year at the end of September. We not only were not in the deficit in the red, we were 10% to the good on the contribution side, over what budget projections were. And so we finished out the fiscal year in a very strong financial position. We were able to economize on the expense side, so our expenses were lower than we projected. Our income and revenue was higher than projected on the contribution side. Our grant side, through Tracy and our grants administrator, we achieved 101% of our goal there. So overall, again, fantastic year. I mean, we're all just standing back applauding what a year it's been.
Yeah. And I remember at the end of your 2019-20 fiscal year, which was the first year of Tracy's tenure, that was a scary year with the pandemic hitting as well. But since those practices have really been implemented and you guys have committed to that strategy, there hasn't been a deficit. So, that's the good news of the story, even in the midst of difficult days and not being able to tour people and do the things that you really wanted to do. The relationship building didn't stop. The strategy continued, and I know that you've continued to build your team and kind of keep that mentality going. So, okay, I'm gonna wrap with a couple of slides, and then we're gonna bring Shannon back on for hopefully a question or two. So just the bottom line here in development, this is what you need: somebody who's going to cultivate those meaningful, mission-centered relationships, and that's what's going to advance your mission. This is the most important quality that you need in a development leader. How do you keep somebody? Once you've hopefully identified the right fit, first, I would say look in your constituency. So Tracy was on the program team at the Samaritan Inn. I mentioned the teacher example a minute ago. Volunteer base, sometimes the donor base, sometimes there's somebody that in that constituency group that has these types of skills and passion for your mission. So I'm not suggesting you don't do a traditional search. I think that's a good practice. And sometimes the right person comes along through that path. But I think we should look harder. We should look harder in our existing constituency at sort of these non-traditional candidates. Make sure you've got realistic expectations, making sure that this doesn't become a catch-all position. Sometimes things live under development that don't belong under development. And then we wonder why everybody's overwhelmed. So really looking at the role and making sure that it's focused and manageable. Fair compensation and incentives. This is important for every role. Nonprofits are famous for underpaying, and Tracy said we're not here for a paycheck, and that's always the truth. But make sure the compensation is at least fair and competitive within the market, because everybody likes, to win financially if they can. And then make sure you've got a retention and growth plan. What does that person really need? What do they want to grow professionally? What are things you could do to give them opportunities? Maybe it's to speak in the community or to train or mentor other staff. It's not always about pay. So what are other ways that you can kind of keep somebody happy and staying at the organization? So wrapping it up here, what happens when we have the right leadership, the right people in the right seats in development is organizational health is much better. We have a much better sustainable growth plan that can be built upon for years to come. Hopefully we have more passionate and engaged donors who are connected to your development team and really enjoy working with them. A better culture and staff that really rallies together as a team. And of course, a thriving development operation or development team. So our final slide here, you don't just hire a development rock star. They are found within the ranks of true believers. And that could take a number of different faces, but that is who we need in development to really make our organization thrive and stand out. So Shannon, I'm going to ask you to come back on and let us know if there's a question or two we can answer.
Absolutely. So if you have a question, go ahead and put those into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to as many of those as we can in our remaining moments. So Jennifer, we do have one from Chris from one of the schools that you mentioned. And he was talking about how to post the job, which I think that we covered through traditional things like the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Center for Nonprofit Management, as well as some non-traditional things, like you said, the parents and volunteers, et cetera. Let's talk more about how you would approach the non-traditional people that may not have the background and aren't even thinking about the major gift position that he has open.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting. I was with a school just a couple days ago, and they're in this exact situation, and they're beginning their search. And I got them thinking about people with these qualities. And I said, forget about where they work, forget about what they do for a living, think about people that represent these things. And suddenly some names started popping up. And one of, somebody said, oh, she would never come here for this reason and this reason and this reason. And I kept challenging, why not? Why wouldn't she come here? What do you think? And so where we landed with that discussion was with a handful of names of people who had come to mind. And so their homework was give them a call. Reach out, tell them what you guys are working on, tell them what you're looking for, tell them that they don't have the classical experience, but just kind of have a conversation about it. Because you're right, they're not thinking about it. They don't think they're a fit for a role like that. So I would say brainstorm, come up with some names, do this with a group of people if you can, maybe with your senior team or other staff members, and develop a short list of people that have these qualities, and then just make personal phone calls to introduce. I mean, that's what recruiters do. And if it's not them, maybe it's somebody they know, but at least you're planting those seeds and beginning to kind of share out within a network that the organization is looking for this profile. And I like the word profile instead of job description, because it's really not about the tasks they're going to perform. It's about the type of person that you need. So I would say develop the profile, identify some people that fit the profile, and make some personal phone calls. So that's where I would start, in addition to whatever postings you may put out publicly.
That's great. Thank you. So we have a question from Richard, and he said, in a private school, or he's heard it's been said, in a private school, at the end of the day, donors and parents want to hear from the head of school. So how do you see a separate development director in schools? And I think you could say the same thing about a nonprofit and the CEO and executive director. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question because a head of school to me is a CEO. So, Rick can speak from his experience here too, in what he does versus what Tracy does and how they manage donor relationships and expectations together. I'll say it quickly, and then Rick, maybe you can follow up. Every CEO, in my opinion, whether your title is head of school, executive director, whatever that may be, needs to be in relationship with top donors. Now that may be 10, that may be 30, I don't know, but at least 10. And because you're right, certain donors want to hear from the head of the organization. So that's number one. Number two is that the CEO and your chief development person should have a very strong relationship in terms of how they're strategically working with donors. And the CEO should be aware of what the chief development person, the relationships they're managing and holding, and vice versa. So the development person is working with the CEO to support and maybe nudge occasionally the CEO to do some of those reach outs. Rick, what would you add from your perspective as a CEO?
No, I think you're spot on in your assessment. Obviously I do have a portfolio of donors that are my responsibility, that I'm building and maintaining relationships with. But Tracy and I are really in lockstep with one another on all of our major donors and who's doing what, and almost to a point now where it's almost interchangeable. I mean, it can be Tracy in my stead, or I can be in Tracy's stead, and it's usually a matter of calendar more than anything else. We know that there are still a few that want to see the CEO and not the CDO, but we've kind of worked through that, and enough relationship building has been going on that most of our donors are really comfortable with either of us.
On the heels of that, Jennifer, one other thing I will say, because it sounds like the question's going is more of maybe the head of school is inundated and doesn't know how to allow that role to be helpful. So one of the things that Rick's done, especially donors that may not technically be the donation level that he would typically cultivate, is he will bring me in and introduce me, for lack of a better term, brag on me, right? Like, oh my goodness, she's running this, she's so great, and that makes them more comfortable with being in relationship with me. So if you're running into those situations, it could be that you need to kind of, massage that relationship and have them in on those meetings and exposed to some of it so that the donor begins to feel more comfortable having those conversations with somebody else if it's not one that you feel you need to be cultivating.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And Tracy, I'm going to give you the last word here, but before I do, you will be getting the audio recording of today's session, as well as the slides and a copy of our ebook that is Finding and Keeping a Development Rockstar, that dives a little deeper into some of these things. Feel free to share those with whomever you might think will find them important. So Tracy, Sarah has been texting me or putting Q&As during this session, and she's trying to pivot into the fundraising role, but she doesn't have that classical background. Years as a volunteer, she's taken classes at Lilly, but she says it's a tough sell to break into fundraising. So what is some advice that you would give Sarah?
So I guess it depends on kind of what direction she's going with fundraising, but ultimately it's all about relationships. It is all about relationships, being passionate about what you're selling, right? Being passionate about the mission, being passionate about whatever it is, to the point that it becomes a conversation. You're no longer reading a script. You're no longer, go off cue cards. You're able to say, listen, this is the impact that you're going to have on your support. And I would love for you to come on board and partner with us and make a difference in the lives of so many people. And the other side of that is cultivation's not always an ask. A lot of people think as a development officer, I have to ask for money every time I go. If I don't have pivotal time at least once a quarter where I am calling just to check on them, the pandemic's happening. How are you? I was thinking about you. You've been on my mind. Or, hey, we had this crazy freeze. I wanted to make sure you're okay. When they get used to seeing you and hearing you and knowing that, wow, this person's really concerned about me, they're a lot more likely to meet you for coffee. They're a lot more likely to come in and hear about your mission, because people, don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? The old attaché. So I would just say relationship, dig in the mission, build in relationship, and then, follow Mission Advancement's tools on, how to cultivate and get all of the things and, together to be a success in trajectory and segmenting, and all those things obviously count. But as far as breaking in, you got to love it.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Rick and Tracy, for joining us today. The conversation was fantastic, very enlightening. And we invite you guys to join us on our next webinar. And in the meantime, please go to our website at missionadvancement.com/resources, and you can find all sorts of wonderful tools there to help you continue with your fundraising program. So thanks so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.